Okay guys, so here we go. We're looking at the exclusive listing contract. Keep in mind this is not a multiple listing contract, and the biggest difference between the exclusive listing and the multiple listing contract is that it does not show up. An exclusive listing property does not show up on MLS, so it's up to us to make sure that we send out all the information to all the realtors that are going to get it. But the good news is the realtors all know that with the exclusive listing that they will be getting paid to show and sell the property. So that's the big difference. And here we go. This is understanding this portion of the contract. And here it is, the exclusive listing contract. I'm going to try to make this as quick as we can. So over here you have the seller's names and addresses. You have the agreement being between them and McDonald Realty. Although this has changed slightly because now there's a designated agent who is myself who's going to look after the sale of the property. So when you sign a listing contract, you're agreeing to list it between this time frame from the current list date, whatever that is, to the expiry date here. And then we have here the seller hereby authorizes the listing brokerage to obtain information concerning the property. So I can go and access stuff from the district, I can find out information of the property, and I can share that information with other agents to let them know what the property is like. I'm allowed to advertise the property through the means required in order to promote your property. That's allowed. And I can place a for sale sign and or a sold sign on the property in accordance with our agreement. The property here is identified by the street address and everything, and then down here is the legal description, which we take off the title search, and then the terms of the sale are here, which is the listing price, and it's always going to be all cash. Now I didn't mention up here though the PID number. That's the number that really is the most critical number. That's what the land transfer is done through, is the PID. It's not done via the actual just legal description. Is actually done strictly through the PID. So that's the most important number to make sure it's correct. Regarding the remuneration and how we're getting paid, a couple things here that we don't follow, but they are in the contract and I want you to be aware of, is that it says that you're going to pay the listing brokerage a commission of 7% of the first 100,000 and 3% of the remainder. We adjust that for our clients on a case-by-case basis. So the number you may see there may be slightly different than what's printed there. And then often down here on the second line, we'll actually write the amount that's going to get paid to anybody who's bringing a buyer through. So that remuneration or that amount of money is required to be payable only on the completion of a contract, but it is due payable when there's a legally enforceable contract created and executed, or within 60 days if there's an expiration of this term, but a contract has already been entered into, you're still obligated to pay that commission. And then there is a point down here, number 3, where you are actually liable to pay the commission to the listing brokerage if somebody comes and offers you a price that is the same as your list price that is under the terms that you require. So it's difficult because the terms aren't identified in this contract. They could be put in a Schedule A, but in an exclusive agreement, typically those terms are not so noted. But just to keep that in mind moving forward, that if somebody brings you a full price offer, under some circumstances you would be required to pay commission. And that's what I'm saying, that we wouldn't necessarily hold you to that because that's not the way we work. But just keep in mind that that's what the contract does say. As far as the assignment of remuneration, the section 5 here just refers to the proceeds of the sale are then used to pay the listing brokerage, which then I get a portion of that, and that just identifies how that happens. Under designated agency, the key components of that are that my personal real estate corporation is representing you, and I'm designated by the listing brokerage. Now, the contract we have is between you and I. It is not between actually the brokerage and yourself. It is actually between me, and you'll see that further on down the contract. Designated agent as such, I won't disclose any of your personal confidential information or anything that you don't want me to disclose. I do not disclose to other agents that are looking at the property or showing the property to potential buyers. Information that is obtained by myself through our relationship does not go to the listing brokerage. So the listing brokerage isn't obligated under the same rules that I am, and that's why the contract is with me. And the reason for that is I don't disclose all of the confidential and personal information to the brokerage. That way somebody else who's within my office can represent a buyer coming in, and we're not in a conflict of interest. So that is why that clause is in there under section 6C here. Designated agent, it also describes some of the things that I will do under this contract. I can only be an agent for you as the seller, provide information about the property to prospective buyers. I can't accept payment from any other party other than yourselves through the contract. I obviously have to do a reasonable effort to market the property. There is, I have to advise you of any people that might be interested in the property. So if somebody shows up and inquires about the property, I do have to let you know that that's the case. And then there's the Real Estate Services Act that we actually have to abide by certain regulations. Those fall within the duties and services, so a duty of care, responsibility, loyalty that we owe you. I also am required to obey all lawful instructions that you give me. So if you tell me that you want me to do something that's within the scope of the law, I obviously have to abide by that. So if you tell me you don't want this disclosed, or you don't want this done, or you do want that done, as long as it falls within the bounds of the law, then I'm obligated to fulfill those obligations for you. Obviously, I'll exercise reasonable care and skill. Been doing this for 20 years, so I have a pretty good grasp on what is expertise in this field, so you'll get top quality service anyways. The listing brokerage, now in the Schedule A, there is a thing that states what the listing brokerage will do as well, but they essentially will monitor everything that I do that is in the Schedule A and any of the activities and my behaviors to make sure I stay on side with everything the Real Estate Board wants us to do. And the listing brokerage also will hold any monies that come in trust as a result of a sale of this property. The reason that can't go through me and it has to go through the listing brokerage is we are not allowed to hold monies personally, but the brokerage is. So that's part of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, so the way that's handled through that. You agree to a certain items on the terms. You agree to promptly advise us of anybody who inquires about the property. So if somebody is talking to you about the property, you're technically obligated to let us know, whether that's another agent or whether that's a person. You're obligated to accept any offer during this contract that is somebody who's willing and able. So back when you were asked to pay us if a contract was entered into, or we brought you a client that was willing and able to pay the full sum of the asking price, that's where this applies to, is you agree that you actually will sell it to them under those terms. Now, if they don't offer you the terms you want, i.e. a completion date or something that's not in your favor, then you don't have to accept the contract. So there's a lot more to it than just stating that you have to accept a contract if it's a full price. They also have to be within the terms that you deem to be acceptable. So it's kind of a way out of that particular component of the listing agreement, but just so you're aware, it is in there. You need to disclose to me anything that you have, any claims, if anybody makes a claim against the property, or anything you know about the property to be a material latent defect or anything like that, you're obligated to disclose to me. You also have to indicate that you actually have the authority to sell the property. That's pretty important, because sometimes when we get into cases where you could sit down with somebody and they seem to have the authority to sell, but there's somebody else behind the scene who actually needs to make that decision, then we need to know about that. So you also acknowledge that all the information that you provide us is as accurate as it can be and to the best of your knowledge. If there are any material changes that occur within the contract during the time of the listing, you'll let us know. So if something dramatic happens during the listing, you need to let us know that there's been a dramatic change in the property. You'll provide us with all information that we require to list and market the property. We are being retained as a designated agent solely for you to provide real estate services to you, and also that the property is not under some other current listing agreement with someone else. You agree and acknowledge that the information from the property about the property can be disclosed to other parties, that we may provide trading services to other people. For example, we can have other properties that are listed. We're not exclusive to you, and in fact we could represent other buyers, just not a buyer that is interested in your property. And going down that, we get into sections C and D here. If somebody does come along that is our client that would like to look at your property or is interested in writing an offer on your property, we are required to recuse ourselves from that position unless one of the two parties agrees to step back and have us sign a conflict of interest form, which understands that we know a little bit more about a particular client, but we're not going to disclose that to anyone. And if all parties agree to that, then we can represent one of the parties, but typically the best scenario is for myself to step back and have an appointed agent represent both the buyer and the seller, two separate agents, but have myself step back completely from that transaction, which can happen, unlikely, but we'll keep you posted on the process if this does happen so that you know exactly what's happening. You also have to be, if you're a non-resident, so on this form you'll be required to identify whether you're a resident or a non-resident. You have to comply obviously with the Income Tax Act. So that's pretty straightforward. Section 11, I did also speak to you guys about the conflicts of interest just a little bit up there when we were talking about it. We typically won't have that issue because I won't represent a second party on the purchase of your property. So if somebody comes along and is interested in buying your property, we will refer them out to somebody else and have them actually go through the property with them. If they specifically state that they do not want representation from another agent, I will show them the property, but when in doing so, I am representing you and I make clear to them that I am under no agency relationship with them whatsoever, and I'm just sharing with the property with them. Should they choose to write, they could either write unrepresented or they could write with another agent that we could potentially assign to them, or it could be somebody else they know. So collection and disclosure of personal information, this is the Privacy Act section, and you guys have got this in another form, so they do put it into the contract about how we can handle the collection and disbursement of your personal information, which typically we can't disclose any of your personal information to anyone at all for any purposes whatsoever. So that's pretty straightforward. Termination of the contract. This part, although significant in a contractual standpoint, is not significant with us because I have an easy exit listing agreement. If at any point in time you wish to cancel the listing, I will cancel the listing. I don't have a problem with that. I've never really had anybody need to cancel a listing if they were indeed planning on selling. We usually fulfill our obligations and everything works out. But if for any reason you do require to cancel the listing, we're happy to do that. The other times that listings can be canceled is at the expiration of the term of the contract, if it's mutually agreed upon by both parties, which is what usually happens if something does happen with us. The contract also terminates if the property is sold. If there's bankruptcy or insolvency of the listing brokerage, so if McDonald Realty to go bankrupt, you then would no longer have an exclusive listing agreement. And finally, if we were unable to provide trading services as a realtor for you for whatever reason, then you would be released from the contract under those circumstances as well. If there is a termination of the contract, obviously we are not able to market your property any further. We have to remove signs from the property and all marketing material has to be taken down. Miscellaneous provisions, really that section you can just read by yourself. It pretty much goes through a couple of terms of the contract. It goes through how contracts are executed between parties. So you can just have a quick look at that. And then at the final section where here you're going to be signing it is acknowledging that you've read and understood the contract. If you're required to go over it with a lawyer, by all means do, but these are standard contracts within the Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver, and they have written it with their lawyer, and this is what people are using to sell their home. You'll be signing down here. This is where you're going to indicate that you're a resident of Canada or a non-resident of Canada. And then under the seller signature here, this is where you sign. I sign here. That makes it a binding contract between the two of us for me to sell your property. I mentioned the exclusive listing contract schedule part A. That is this section here, which describes some of the things that we're going to do to market your property and how we'll go about promoting your property since it's not MLS listed. As you'll see, there's nothing on this list that has anything to do with multiple listing services. It'll all just be the stuff that we do outside of MLS. And then when we get to the multiple listing contract, that's when all that other stuff will be added in. That's pretty much an exclusive listing contract in a nutshell. If you have any questions at all, obviously contact me and let me know. And when we sit down and go over the contract, I can answer any questions you have at that time. Thanks very much, and we will talk to you later.